Welcome to Game Changers podcast. You've earned your stripes more so than can be said on the show to be here. And I just appreciate you making the time as well. So just in terms of my opening question, which is more related to you as the person, can you share the story behind TymeBank's founding and what personal experience or values inspired you to start the bank? And how do those ideals continue to shape TymeBank's mission today?
Johan, thanks for having me on your podcast. You know, I do think that when one thinks about starting a new business, the most important question to answer at the start, and also in a sense, the most important question to ask as you go through the difficult times and continue to grow and expand the business, is why? Why am I doing it? Why are we doing it as a team? And how does the why of the business connect to my personal reason for getting up in the morning and my sense of meaning? So in a sense, your first question for me is the most important question that in a sense colors everything that one does in the business, either consciously because you engage with this question or subconsciously and unknowingly colors the way you run the business. And I would say the worst why probably for starting anything is to make as much money as you can. And so for me, the why is always related in some way to the contribution I can make to the world. And so for me, my backstory is that I studied law. My first job was teaching human rights and jurisprudence. And I did that in the early 90s as South Africa was getting to the point of becoming a true democracy. And I think in the 90s, we were all very optimistic and excited about the society we would create. But what became very clear to me as I was building my career as a lawyer in the 90s is that political emancipation doesn't necessarily lead to economic empowerment. And so I started really sort of engaging with this question in my own sort of research and in my own thinking. How does one create a society that is more fair, is more empowering for people, and what are the levers that one can potentially pull to make that happen? And I came across in 2000 when I was doing my MBA, I came across a very interesting Peruvian economist by the name of Hernando de Soto. He wrote a book, The Mystery of Capital. And in that book, he argued that wealth and poverty had a lot to do with how economies were structured and whether people were given access to the tools of economic empowerment to save money, to borrow money against their assets or against their future earnings, to get insurance for the things they need to be insured against. And he believed that if we did give people access to those tools, that we could meaningfully impact not only the patterns of wealth and poverty in society, but also the patterns of power, and create communities and societies where more people are empowered to reach their full potential. And I think as the years went on, I sort of refined my own thinking. And if you ask me today why I'm doing this today, I would say that my central passion is about potential, human potential. And I think in some small way in our business, where we focus on economic inclusion and in giving people financial tools to run their lives, in some way we are contributing to people reaching or at least being enabled to reach their full economic potential.
That's a very powerful why. It says a lot about you as a person and also in the people that you bring into that vision, right? So it's obviously not a sole endeavor. You've got hundreds, thousands of employees every day that are waking up wanting to fulfill that ambition. One of the themes as well that I sense from what you're saying is it's about dignity as well. So when you create economic inclusion, you give someone a sense of dignity that they belong to a broader structure than just the village that they're from or the town that they're from. I remember when my brother and I had a small business together, we opened up our first bank account. It was with another bank because TymeBank wasn't available at the time, but it was a disruptor bank in South Africa that was, misunderstood, and people thought they had no role to play. And I remember we took all of our life savings, which at that time wasn't a great deal of money, but it was everything we had, and we put it into this bank because they were offering a very good interest rate. And we figured if we get that interest rate, we could then scale the business, more working capital. But I remember at the time thinking, this is interesting to see that this new bank is starting to show its face, and that inclusion that it creates, right? And we still have many unbanked individuals in South Africa. Even in my own family home, the lady that cleans my mom's house, she entrusts my mom with wages because she doesn't feel comfortable putting money in the bank, right? So there's still a stigma in your mindset that needs to shift. But if we can get those unbanked banked and enable financial tools to be made available, that scales into home loans and equity that can be unlocked, short-term capital through micro-lending, etc.
Yeah, spot on. Johan, I think the thing that you say about dignity resonates with me. I remember my human rights professor used to say that every constitution has what the Germans call a Grundmoral, a sort of a central idea or a central value to that constitution. For the Americans, it's personal freedom. For the French, it's equality. For the Chinese, it's stability. And I think for us in South Africans, it is dignity. And that goes to an important point, which is that when we put things out into the world, it's not just about the technocratic question of sort of, does the thing work, but also very much the emotional and the human question of, do we deploy it in a way that gives people a sense of dignity? In my mind, an important part of dignity is agency. So do I, when I use my bank account or my savings account, or I sign up for my funeral policy or whatever the product is, do I have a sense that I understand this product, that I'm in control of this product, that I am making these decisions in relation to this product, and that this product is sort of empowering me in my financial life? Or do I have the sense that I'm at the mercy of a big and opaque system that I cannot control or understand, and I sort of go to bed with this uneasy feeling that I'm actually don't know whether this thing will work or not? And I think part of our job is to design products in such a way that the user experience is an empowering, dignifying, and a enlightening experience where as I go, I am learning and I'm becoming happier and more satisfied with my financial situation.
Yeah, and I think because of the complex nature of financial literacy, it also encourages the customer to then start learning about concepts which perhaps they would not have had any exposure to. A small example being compound interest. How does that actually work? Positively and negatively. If you're borrowing money or you're investing money, it's the eighth wonder of the world, according to Einstein. So a small concept which has profound impacts on one's life. But if you start understanding that, to say, I need to save whatever I can, even if it's a menial amount of money on a monthly basis, and if I put that into a small investment that's low risk but long term, that could pay for my kids' education one day, as an example, or contribute towards their education. It encourages long-term thinking, because when you're in survival mode, it's very easy to just think about your next paycheck, whether that's a wage or a monthly salary. But financial planning requires long-term thinking. So I think that's an interesting way of encouraging macro thinking versus just the near micro thoughts that one has.
Yeah. And I think when it comes to the educational aspect, the thing that we've learned over the years is that it doesn't help to sit somebody down and try and give them, I'll use your example, try and give them a sort of a lecture on compounding. As adults in particular, we tend to only learn things we have to learn in that moment or that are relevant to us. We tend to learn one step at a time, and we tend to learn in bite-sized chunks. And in a way, if you think about a financial product, let's take a savings account. It's actually a great way to teach somebody savings, because you have an opportunity every time they engage with a product just to teach them one more little thing. And all that learning compounds over time, just like interest compounds, to get to a place where when the customer is ready, they have the aha moment and they sort of go to the next level. And so I think part of what I'm excited about as we get better and better technology tools in the future to engage with customers is this opportunity to create sort of in the moment, bite-sized learning opportunities that over time will sort of transform the way somebody sees the world. It's a sort of Aristotelian idea, that our entire lives is a function of how our thoughts and our actions compound into habits and over time compound into our character,
Very profound and very true. A little and often. My next question relates more to the theme of innovation and technology impact, which is, I appreciate that's not why the business was started, but it's definitely a key part of the business. So, as technology rapidly transforms finance, how does TymeBank harness innovations like blockchain, AI, or digital transformation more broadly to redefine traditional banking models and create new opportunities?
Yeah, I think the starting point for me with technology is to be very clear, depending on what kind of business you are, on what is the appropriate place for technology in your business. And so I'll say a few things for us as a sort of a consumer technology business, sort of a consumer and small business orientated business. I think the first thing is that technology is always a means to an end. You will find people who are in digital banking and it's all about digital. For us, it's not all about digital. Digital is a means to an end to create customer solutions. And we actually have customers who are not very digital. We have customers who went to the kiosk, opened a bank account in 3.5 minutes, are walking around with their TymeBank card in their wallet, and they've never downloaded the app. And that's okay because they're using the product the way that works for them. So for me, the first point is technology is a means to an end. The second point is that I would say we are very much technology application innovators as opposed to fundamental technology innovators. And here and there, we've been pushed to the end where we needed to design and innovate at the cutting edge, design things that hadn't existed before. An example is our kiosk that we had in retail stores. That's a unique piece of technology that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, that we designed ourselves, we patented it, we built the first 4 versions ourselves, and it was only version 5 that we outsourced and that we are now manufacturing in Taiwan. But we only did that because that thing that we knew we needed didn't exist in the world. Most of what we do is essentially taking known technologies and combining them in novel ways to meet a customer need. And in that sense, we have learned over time that it's actually quite good not to try and be too much at the cutting edge of new things, to wait for technology to be well proven. And sometimes it can take weeks or months to prove something well. It doesn't need to take years before we sort of place a big bet on it. And then that, I would say something that not all innovators would agree with me and founders would agree with me. I actually think the highest level of innovation is in business is operating model innovation. You're actually taking the newest and best technologies that exist and to think creatively about how you run your business in such a way that you meaningfully change the price performance in your industry or in what you're doing. When we set out building Time, we said we want to build a bank and run a bank at a 10th of the cost of the incumbents.
Okay.
And we want to do it so cheaply that we can serve even the poorest customer profitably. And so for me, the single thing that I'll brag a little bit, Johan, since I'm on the roll, I'll brag it. The single thing that I'm actually most proud of is that we can bank a SRD grant recipient in South Africa. So that is somebody who gets a basic income grant of 350 Rand a month, that is less than $1 a day of income. We can bank that customer profitably while it costing that customer very, very little. We have about 11 to 12 months payback on that segment of customers when they start banking with us. And we make most of our money through them buying their airtime and their electricity and gaming vouchers and other things on the platform, rather than charging them exorbitant transaction fees on the account.
First of all, well done. That's a significant, I mean, Peter Thiel talks about your idea needs to be 10 times bigger or greater than the nearest incumbent. I think when it comes to cost optimization and cost saving, that's a big ask. And it's often less glamorous because to increase revenue is relatively easier than to reduce costs, because you've got to drive efficiencies and then find new ways of being effective once those efficiencies have been exhausted. And especially in a sector like banking, where a lot of the operational models have been experimented with, you've got to be very creative to unpack, well, where are these opportunities that everyone else is overlooking?
Exactly, Jon. So that is the key is you have to be creative. There is no prize for somebody who comes with an incremental idea. Like something that's 10% better than the existing players, it just doesn't cut it. It has to be fundamentally better. So when we set up the business originally, we said a few things. This was the first version of the business we built in 2012. We said things that at that time seemed absolutely crazy. And we were just completely uncompromising about it, right? And we said, we will build a bank. We will never touch cash. We will never touch paper. We will have no paper in our business. Every single process will be straight through processing. We will have no middle office. We will have no tellers. We will have no sort of banking, employees, frontline sort of bankers. And we sort of made a list of all the things we wouldn't have in the business. And I showed it to a colleague of mine at the time, and he looked at it and he said, I don't know, you're building something, but it's not a bank.
Yeah, we're calling it a bank, but it's not a bank.
It's like, and I thought that was a good sign. If that guy thought it wasn't a bank, then you were on the right track on what we were uncompromising about. And here, for people who are really interested in sort of operating model innovation, the work that initially inspired me on this was another academic, a guy named C.K. Prahalad. In the early 2000s, he wrote a book called Fortune at the Base of the Pyramid. And it was really about people who were building businesses in places like in India and Bangladesh and other places that shifted operating model efficiencies by an order of magnitude. Yeah, so beyond the big dreams, it very quickly comes down to boring technical things around business and operating model design.
I saw an infographic a couple of weeks ago which showcased the current world economy. So it's dominated by 5 countries. Half of the world's GDP of the $107 trillion globally is in the hands of a handful of countries. And then that showcases a hypothesized version based on current economic trends, whereby 2050, the world economy doubles to just over 200 trillion. So there's a doubling of the global economy in GDP. And you look at the proposed layout of who has the lion's share of that. It's still the United States and China, India, etc. But then lower down the food chain in the proverbial middle class of the world economy, there's a huge reshuffling of who gets access to those economic opportunities. And I think for me, that really sparked a thought process to say, but what can the global South, what can their role be? And I know the Philippines is part of the global North, but just proverbially speaking, emerging markets where people are technology hungry, they're willing to go from Alcatel to Apple. Like, take the leap. We don't have to go through all the intermediaries. There's an appetite to experiment, a willingness to fail fast. These are all terms that you would hear in any leading business school, but you walk around Zambia, South Africa, Brazil, the Philippines, you sense that people are hungry for change and they're happy to experiment, be part of that journey. I'm excited about what the role is that banking can play in facilitating that reshuffling of the global economy.
Yeah, and I do think, we all see the world from our perspective, so take it from whence it comes. But I do think that a key driver of those changes that will come in behind the demographic changes that will play a big role will be the banking and financial services infrastructure. The way we think about it is that for a country to reach its full potential, it sort of needs only a few structural elements to be healthy and in place. It needs biometric identity. It needs a real-time, free or near-free digital push payments. It needs an open banking system or a credit bureau. It needs cheap data, very cheap data, so that that's not an inhibitor. And once those basic building blocks are in place, that people will find ways to make money and to add value and to be creative. People don't need savings. They don't need to be saved. What people need is they need access to the tools that you and I take for granted, and they'll figure it out. I heard the other way, somebody says, he doesn't like the saying that you teach people to fish. He says, because most people don't want to teach to fish, to be taught to fish. They want to they want to do other things.
Yeah.
And so it's not for you to decide what people should be taught. It's for you to give them the access to the tools and the information they need to live their lives. And this is where I do think banking can play a big role. And to your point, I think, if I speak to my friends in the Philippines, they probably would regard themselves as part of the global South. They do very much think of themselves as, along with South Africa, Brazil, I would say the whole of South America, the whole of Southeast Asia, other countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia. I think all these countries see themselves as the winners of the future. The thing that I love about spending time in the Philippines and in Vietnam and in Indonesia is people are super optimistic.
Yeah.
They
In spite of everything.
Yeah. They feel their lives are going to be better and their children's lives are going to be even better,
Yeah.
There's one prediction that Vietnam, as an example, that people will be double as wealthy as they are today in dollar terms on a GDP per capita basis in 10 years than they are today. Imagine living in a country where you go, I'm going to be double as wealthy in 10 years if I just knuckle down and work hard and do my part,
And that's 10 years are with an eye shot. It's not like, I've got to wait 50 years to see the change, which even if you're very patient, that's a long time to wait. 10 years is, 5 years ago was COVID. This is within living memory. So profound. I did not know that, but I have friends who are Vietnamese who are always very positive about the future. So that might be a correlation to why.
No, I think so. I think there's just like a young, energetic, I would say, a national culture that has been developing there, and that I've been watching with great interest over the last, it's now almost 10 years that I've been involved in Vietnam. It's just been 10 amazing years watching that country develop.
Incredible. So we're about halfway through now, Coen, just for timekeeping. We've got 3 more questions left. The third one I want to ask you is around the theme of sustainability and responsible business, which I know is a core part of your business. But I appreciate sustainability is much more than a buzzword. It's a business imperative. In what ways is TymeBank integrating sustainable practices into its strategy? And how do you balance growth with responsible long-term decision-making?
Yeah, that's a big topic, as you know, Johan, and there are many, many angles and aspects that one can cover. The way I think about it, I still think about Time as a startup. We're 6 years old, but I'm hanging on to the startup identity because I think it's a healthy identity to have.
No, if you like Amazon, it's the startup 30 years later.
Yes. So I'm hanging on to it, whatever other people say. And one of the things for a startup, I think that the first job of sustainability is to make sure that you run a profitable business and one that gives your shareholders a good risk-adjusted return on investment. You know that what you're doing is higher risk than the people around you, so you have to give a better return than the people around you. And Whatever people talk about theoretically in sustainability, if you're not running a business that produces a surplus and that grows, you don't have a sustainable business. With that sort of basics in place, I think the next important point of sustainability is the relationship of the business with its communities, and particularly because we're a consumer-facing business. The contribution we make to the lives of our customers is the central point of sustainability. So we talk about like ESG as an example. For us, it is primarily about S. And for me, social impact is primarily, in our case, obsessed with expanding access and increasing inclusion in the system. So, more than half of our customers are rural customers. A very significant majority of our small business customers are women. More than half of our customers are women. We are very, very focused on customers who have not had access to these services. I think something like 74% of our customers say that if it wasn't for TymeBank, they wouldn't have what they needed to run their lives. Around 74-75% of our customers say that we are meaningfully improved their quality of life through becoming our customers. And for me, that's sort of the primary focus of sustainability for us. I think the secondary one is good governance. I live in an interesting sort of world of contrast at the moment because we're headquartered in Singapore. And I would say in every single respect, Singapore is a benchmark for how one should run a city and a country. In terms of how well the country is run in comparison to many emerging markets that we operate in. And I had a lunch with one of the co-authors of the biography of Lee Kuan Yew, who's the founder of Singapore, who's also on our board in the Philippines. And I said to him, so what is it? How is it that Singapore has gone in 1965 from a country that had the same GDP per capita as Tanzania to being the number 3 financial center in the world today after New York and London?
Yeah, that's profound.
He said, his view was the number one thing is governance. Is being absolutely uncompromising on things like conflicts of interest, corruption, any of these things. And what I find with our shareholders, we had some hard yards in the last six years building the business. By the way, this month is six years since we launched TymeBank in South Africa.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and we've had really hard yards. But as long as your shareholders trust you, as long as your governance is absolutely solid, and they never have to go. They might go to sleep worrying whether the business will succeed. They never go to sleep worrying whether you'll take their money or whether you're going to do funny things that sort of prefer one group of stakeholders over another. Not only do you sleep well, actually, I think you are truly building for sustainability in the long term. And then we can talk about climate. I had an ignorant attitude until about a year back to say we're a digital bank. We don't have climate issues, right? Like we don't have branches, we don't have cash banks, we don't have ATMs. We're as light footprint as they can be.
Yeah.
Until I started understanding the impact of data centers and the electricity and water hungriness of data as a sustainability issue. And we already are and will become major users of processing capacity in the world. And so I think the environmental thing, in a way that I didn't actually appreciate until recently, is something that we are going to have to think about more carefully.
First of all, thank you for reflecting and sharing. And as you rightfully said, it's a very complex topic. There's a lot of volatility and uncertainty around themes and legislation and reporting standards. So best endeavors ultimately, and also to see it as core to your to your business versus a flavor of the month topic that one has to comply with. I think that's the true danger, is when you just move with whatever is topical and forget that ultimately you've got to stand for something, or you will fall for anything, right? And that's where you as the leader come in, because you have, like you said in the beginning, a clear vision, misunderstood by many people, which is fine, because you have to be willing to be misunderstood as a founder. It's part of the beauty and the ask as a founder. And then once you become successful, obviously you have an army of believers, because now it's obvious to believe, and it's the right thing to believe. Maybe just a quick story from my side. When I was at university, a friend of mine, who's now a very famous ecologist, at that stage was a student, pulled me into an opportunity to help a local township, Khayelitsha, in the Western Cape, to rehabilitate a wetland. I didn't know what a wetland was. I had zero experience or understanding of the topic, and I'd never been in a township before. So he took me in, and I was like, are we safe to do this? Like, this feels like we were always told, stay clear of the townships, don't be on the roads at night, etc., etc. And we were welcomed by the community, and this lady came up to me and said, what brings you here? I said, well, I'm trying to restore the wetland, because it's an opportunity to promote biodiversity and restore birds in the area, and it's an area of natural beauty potentially. And her answer was quite simple, was, well, how does that serve me? Because I currently have to wash my clothes somewhere, and if I can't use the water from the wetland, then that's a problem for me. What do my kids do with their clothes? And so the behavioral change was the first thing we had to address. It wasn't that the community wasn't interested in biodiversity or restoring nature. It's that it served a practical purpose, which if we took that away, another problem gets created in an environment where there are enough problems as is. And it was through her voice and other voices where we were able to better understand. So if we want to see the behavioral shift, we need to create an economic opportunity from this. So tourism, then nature-based tourism in townships was a very novel and new idea. We're going back to 2003, so 22 years ago. But since then, the wetland has been restored. It was a process. There was the lottery fund in South Africa got involved in it, the national lottery, but it took that micro understanding of, it's not that people are trying to be difficult. Sustainable choices are fantastic. We'd all love to do the right thing for the environment. But at what price point can we access it? Is it an elitist thing to be sustainable? Or is it equitable in every sense of the word? Because you don't want to marginalize people even more, because a choice that's sustainable is now the more expensive one, and finances just don't allow for it. And I think that is, to your first statement, the sustainability of the business needs to be one of profitability for the shareholders, because ultimately that's how the money trickles down. And then do it in a way which is not in conflict with the environment, and ideally complements the environment.
No, it's a great story, Johan. And there's an easy test for me when you're involved in trying to innovate or do something good in the world. The moment you point to your customer or to the community in which you operate and you go, they the problem, you're on the wrong track. The moment you think, well, she should really not be like that, and she should really sort of think about different ways to wash her clothes, you're on the wrong track, right? In a way, for me, the starting point of healthy innovation and the starting point of any meaningful change is compassion, is actually understanding the reality of the person you're trying to serve or the community that you're impacting through what you're trying to do. And if you're not able to operate from that perspective, or at least with a very deep respect for where that person is coming from, assuming good intent and knowing that, humans all over the world are a lot more the same than we think. And that is across countries, across cultures, and across socioeconomic groups. And if you don't start from the perspective that there is no them, there is only us, you are going to be your own worst enemy and getting transformation done in them. But the day it is clear to you that there is only us and that we're going to have to figure this out together, then you're actually in the right mind space to do something useful.
Yeah, that's very beautiful. That's very true. Very, very true. Yeah. It's like the saying, I am because we are. Yeah, it's that community aspect. And I think it's often lost because we we live in a hyper-personalized world and a hyper-individualized world where the me is prioritized above everything.
Don't get me started on that topic. Like actually a lot of what we think of as me is actually an illusion. The Buddhists are right? Like if I ask you to do a list of like Johan, who's Johan? And like, what does Johan consist of? And you actually then unpack what are the things that you think constitute you? They generally a bunch of historical fact that somebody else has told you about you. So individualism, I think is highly problematic. And I think that in many respects is one of the philosophical constructs that as a species has led us down the wrong paths.
Yeah. That is a topic for another podcast. We'll have to do a follow-up one where we just talk about the philosophy of life and what it means to be human and what it truly means to be human. But maybe we can unpack that at another stage. I have a philosophical question for you at the end, but before we finish, second last question. So the theme is overcoming challenges and leadership lessons, of which I'm sure you have thousands to tell, but every pioneering venture faces its share of obstacles. You mentioned this earlier as well. Can you share some significant challenges TymeBank has encountered along the way and explain how these experiences have influenced your leadership style and strategic decisions?
We've made a lot of mistakes along the way. So some of our crises that we had in our business's history were self-inflicted. We also faced quite often conditions that we would have never predicted. And I think that, we're in a sort of I would say a sort of a vintage of startups that all will have a story to tell that cannot be told without the word COVID coming into the conversation.
Wow.
So we launched in February 2019. In March 2020, the entire world went into lockdown. And that created for us a existential crisis that many, many businesses like us did not survive. And it was on two fronts. The one is that we had just sort of started scaling a personal loan book that in 6 weeks went from looking quite healthy to having more than 50% non-performing loans.
Wow.
We also were in the last phase of closing a capital raise that lead investor pulled out of in the entire capital raise. So we were suddenly losing more money than we planned, and we didn't have the capital that we thought we would have. So
you unplug the holes quickly enough.
So we literally went in a period of 3 weeks from thinking that we're styling to thinking that we may not survive this. And it took us the better part of 2020 to get the business back on track. Do what every business at the time needed to do, go into survival mode, cut costs, rethink the plan and the strategy, rethink the capital raise. But in that year, a lot of what is good about the business was created in that year. We pitched the idea of investing in the business to over 200 investors before we got the first investor who said, yes, I'll invest.
During this COVID period?
During this COVID period. So somewhere between May and November 2020, all of it on video calls, we sort of raised capital across the whole world, speaking to whoever would listen to us. But a lot of good came out of that crisis. We got some of our best investors in that round. Apis Partners, London-based firm, were the first courageous guys to say they'll back us. They were followed by Tencent, by Commonwealth Development Corporation, which is now British International Investments, and the rest is history. Now we're at a point where the largest and most successful bank in the world, Nubank, has just invested in us. But that good thing, which is getting the right investors, came from that time. We also at the time sort of changed a number of our strategy decisions. One of it was to accelerate our entry into the Philippines. where we saw a fantastic opportunity, and that was not nearly in as hard lockdown as South Africa at the time. That turned out to be a great decision and has sort of put us on a whole different path. We also made the decision to move from Hong Kong to Singapore, which was a great decision. I can sort of list the good decisions that came out of what was our biggest existential crisis. So, like at a leadership style, what did I learn? I learned that, like, when you're in a crisis like that, the only way to survive is not to stop, to become completely dogged. I'll describe it in terms of archetypes. You know, when you start a business, the archetype that comes to mind is Prometheus. You know, he's a guy who stole fire from the gods, and you're there and you're stealing fire from the gods, you're changing the world. Well, when you're in a situation like that, in a crisis, the archetype that comes to mind is Sisyphus. It's the guy who rolls the boulder up the hill every day, and every morning when he wakes up, the boulder's at the bottom of the hill, and he needs to start rolling it back up the hill. And just keep rolling that bloody boulder up the hill every single day, because you believe that if you just keep doing it and keep doing it as smartly as you can, at some point you make the breakthrough. There's this crazy French-Algerian philosopher, Albert Camus, who says this crazy thing. He says, imagine Sisyphus happy.
Okay. A bit stoic.
Exactly. Imagine a world where actually that, like, the experience of doing the hard stuff is actually in itself satisfying, is itself rewarding. And that's sort of if I say from a personal perspective, that's how you get through the tough times. And you get through the tough times through knowing that in the tough times, more than any other times, as a leader, you are a servant and you come last. Your interest, what's important to you, your sleep comes last. You know, and then when you come through, then you can do what I've just done. Have a 6-week break and feel good about it.
I'm going to expand on the Atlas analogy. You know, you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders as a leader. Oftentimes, others don't see that because it's impossible to understand the burden of responsibility you've got unless you're in that position yourself. You know, it ties back to our earlier statement around adult. You can only understand something if you experience it. I can tell you leadership is harder. You can tell me, on being a CEO of a big bank, really hard, sleepless nights, uncertainty, sacrifice. But all of those things I don't really appreciate until I've actually had to do that myself, whatever that sacrifice may be. And then the ability to manage stress as well, which, you know, it sounds like your approach is to say, if the hard things are the reward versus the jazzy, flashy stuff that happens at the end, you know, the rewards, the accolades, the black tie events, those are great, but those are not the things that keep you fueled. You're not going to stay motivated on your why if that's what you're chasing, because that will fizz out very quickly. It'll feel like it's impossible in any case. You know, you will have, like you said, a existential crisis come your way, which you never predicted. The world didn't predict. You don't know how long it's going to last. You're having to plan in a vacuum with very limited resources and almost accepting the fact that failure is inevitable. So we're just staving it off one more day to stay in the fight, because we need to wait for that Hail Mary to happen at some point, which we can only experience if we stay in the fight. So how do we do that? Mindset-wise, approach to business, customer centricity, firm on the vision, but very flexible on the details, because the details are now completely different to the original plan that was set out. I mean, this is crisis leadership at its finest.
Everything is easy.
And here's a nuance in that conversation, and that is that there is no certainty. In fact, life is a process of unbearable uncertainty. So replace certainty with clarity, like understanding, why am I here? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Because and try to rid yourself of your expectations. Life might be worse or better than you expected, but it certainly will be different from what you expected. I think even my team will say that sometimes they look back on those days, they remember it fondly. You know, like it was real.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see it in your memory.
Good. We're almost at time. I'm really enjoying the conversation, but I appreciate you've got a very busy schedule. I'm going to leave you with one last question, which it's not the original question I wanted to ask, but I've modified it based on what we've spoken about. But what do you see TymeBank's role and your role as a legacy being? You know, if we were to look, using the Vietnam analogy, we look forward 10 years into the future, which is a blink of an eye away. What would you love to see as an article or a story or a narrative around TymeBank and more importantly, your legacy in that story?
Yeah. You know, the first thing I would say is that I'm a little bit careful of the sort of legacy concept, because I think that it could lead one down the wrong path where you become quite egotistical and you end up being less adventurous. You're not willing to see where the world takes you because you have a view of where you're going to end up that may actually undersell what can be done. But if you said like, what would we like to be remembered for? I think that particularly in the digital banking world, I hope that we able now to tell a story that it's possible to do things in a way that people didn't think was possible, to give customers a price performance that's better than what anyone thought could happen, and that other people will follow our story. So I hope many other people will look at what we've done and also try to do it. I think there's a particular part of our story that is about not doing digital for digital's sake, but using it as a tool to empower people. And that digital can be used to meaningfully bring financial inclusion. So I'm hoping that will be part of our contribution. I've often thought about what we do as being just one member of a movement. And I hope that we've helped give that movement, or that we're helping to give that movement momentum.
Yeah.
I think, speaking as a South African who's gone out into the world, I also hope that our story will encourage emerging market entrepreneurs to be adventurous and to take their ideas to the bigger world. I think emerging markets, whether it's Africa or Southeast Asia or Latin America, they have so many talented, energetic people who have a lot to offer the world. And I hope that our story will encourage people to go, everything that's interesting, good, and innovative doesn't have to come from Silicon Valley or Europe or one of those places, that it can come from places like the places we come from, and that we can take our innovations to other emerging markets. So instead of everyone aspiring to take their businesses from Johannesburg and Cape Town to New York and London, convincing to take it to Mexico and Brazil and Philippines and Indonesia. And I'm hoping that we will see more and more, particularly South African entrepreneurs, go out into the world.
Yeah, that's that's why this podcast is so important. It is about inspiring, even if it's just one listener, because that one listener could be Coen from 20 years ago that listens to a podcast or a thought leadership piece or hears a story that resonates and is relatable. And I think that's the responsibility that entrepreneurs also have is, if you have an idea in your head and you've got this weird thing that tells you've got to go and build something, go and build it, even if you're misunderstood, even if it feels impossible, or even if it is impossible, because at some point the technology will catch up with your idea, or, you listen to these founder stories like Steve Jobs, 50 years later, Apple is still an innovator. To a lesser or greater extent, that can be debated, but the fundamentals of it, two guys in a garage building a computer, right? Not realizing that this thing is going to enable thousands of industries to be created around it, right? And if you just looked at it for what it was in that garage, it wasn't glamorous, it wasn't exciting, it couldn't do very much, but it's that spark that can light the transformation And when someone looks and sounds like you that is successful, it also gives you the agency to do the same. Because if someone with an American accent is building a business that's $1 trillion business, fantastic. But I can't relate to that because I don't even know where this place is geographically. I've never been. I don't understand their culture or mental standards. But if someone's from my neighborhood, or they at least sound like me or look like me, it inspires me to think I've also got a fair chance then. If they can do it, then I can do it. And I think that's the responsibility entrepreneurs have.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you one thing, like, me and my team, we are not smarter than everyone else. We might be a bit crazier than everyone else, which means that South Africans should have a good chance,
It's something we all share.
Fantastic. Coen, we're at time. I really appreciate you making the effort, and I can only wish you the very best for you and your team. Keep thinking big, keep showcasing bias for action, inspiring and leading in the capacity that you are. And I'm very excited to see what's next. I'm sure if the hockey stick isn't going to kick in now, one can only imagine the exciting things that are going to be happening down the road.
Thank you.
Anytime. Much appreciated. Thanks, Coen. Thank you, Ponzo.